Sometimes the richest man in the room is the one everyone just finished calling a failure. The courtroom doors swung open with a tired groan, and Ethan Brooks stepped into the pale afternoon sunlight carrying nothing but a worn leather folder and the quiet weight of a broken promise. Behind him, voices drifted through the marble hallway, lawyers congratulated one another, reporters packed away cameras, and strangers whispered the same conclusion. The single dad had lost everything. His marriage was over. His savings were gone. His house belonged to someone else. Even the judge's final order had reduced the precious hours he could spend with his 9-year-old daughter to a handful of weekends each month. Rachel Brooks walked down the courthouse steps several yards behind him, surrounded by friends who assured her she had finally escaped a man who never became successful enough. Her attorney smiled as though justice had just been served with perfect precision. Ethan never looked back. He simply adjusted the faded strap on his folder and continued toward the parking lot, where an old pickup truck with peeling paint waited beneath a row of maple trees. Every step echoed with remarkable calm, not because his heart wasn't breaking, but because some people learned long ago that dignity made less noise than despair. Across the plaza, Lily Brooks stood beside her grandmother, clutching a small stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her bright blue eyes searched for her father the moment he appeared. She wanted to run to him, but uncertainty held her feet still. She had spent months listening to adults argue about money, careers, custody schedules, and futures, yet no one had asked the little girl what mattered most. To her, success wasn't measured by bank accounts or courtroom victories. Success was the man who packed her school lunches, braided her hair when she insisted on trying something new, and never forgot to kiss her forehead before bedtime. Ethan finally reached her, knelt to one knee, and smiled with the same gentle warmth he had carried through every difficult season of their lives. "Hey, Peanut," he said softly. "You ready for ice cream this weekend?" Lily nodded, though tears filled her eyes. "Are you okay, Daddy?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering. "I'm standing beside you. That means I'm doing just fine." Those words should have sounded impossible. They should have collapsed beneath the weight of everything he had just lost. Yet somehow they carried a quiet strength that even strangers nearby couldn't ignore. A cool spring breeze drifted across the courthouse square, rustling American flags mounted along the entrance, and carrying with it the distant rhythm of something unusual. At first it sounded like little more than a faint vibration somewhere beyond the downtown skyline. Few people noticed. Others continued chatting, laughing, and climbing into expensive sedans. Ethan remained focused entirely on Lily, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear as though the rest of the world had disappeared. Then the sound grew louder. Heads slowly turned toward the western horizon. The vibration became a thunderous pulse rolling through the afternoon air. Conversation stopped in the middle of sentences. Car alarms chirped as gusts of wind swept across the parking lot. High above the courthouse, a dark helicopter emerged over the city buildings, descending steadily toward the open plaza outside the very courthouse where everyone believed Ethan Brooks had just walked away with absolutely nothing. The roaring blades continued slicing through the air, sending loose leaves dancing across the courthouse lawn while every conversation dissolved into stunned silence. Ethan instinctively pulled Lily closer, shielding her eyes from the swirling dust without taking another step. Around them, expensive suits froze in place, phones slowly rose into the air, and courthouse deputies exchanged uncertain glances as the sleek black helicopter descended with remarkable precision onto the open section of the plaza. Rachel frowned, confused rather than frightened. Brandon Ellis lowered the smug smile he had worn only moments earlier. "Who in the world is that for?" someone whispered. No one answered. The landing skid settled gently onto the pavement, and the powerful engine eased into a steady hum. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The silence somehow became louder than the aircraft itself. Then the cabin door opened. A tall man in a neatly pressed flight suit stepped onto the pavement with calm confidence. His silver wings caught the afternoon sun. Captain Mason Reed scanned the crowd only once before walking directly toward Ethan Brooks. He did not hesitate. He did not look left or right. Every purposeful step suggested this meeting had been planned long before anyone entered that courtroom. Ethan recognized him immediately, although his expression barely changed. Mason stopped exactly 3 feet away, straightened his posture, and raised a crisp salute. "Good afternoon, Colonel Brooks," he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Permission to report, sir?" Gasps rippled across the courthouse steps. Rachel stared as though she had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Brandon blinked several times before looking back at the man he had spent the entire morning describing as an unsuccessful father with no meaningful future. Even Judge Margaret Collins, who had just exited the building through the front entrance, paused halfway down the marble staircase. Ethan held the salute for a quiet moment before returning it with effortless precision. "At ease, Captain," he replied. His voice sounded exactly the same as it had inside the courtroom, calm, measured, almost gentle. Nothing about him suggested triumph. Nothing invited revenge. Mason lowered his hand. "They asked me to bring you in personally," the general insisted. Ethan glanced down at Lily, whose eyes had grown as wide as the helicopter itself. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging softly on his sleeve. "Why did he call you Colonel?" Ethan smiled, kneeling until they were eye level. "Because a long time ago, before you were born, I had a different job." Lily tilted her head. "Like a superhero?" He chuckled quietly. "No, sweetheart. Just someone who tried to help people get home." His answer sounded almost too simple, but that was the way Ethan had always spoken about his past. He had never measured his life by medals, rank, or recognition. He measured it by the people he had been able to protect and later by the little girl standing in front of him. Mason waited patiently, never interrupting. Around them, curiosity spread through the growing crowd like a slow-moving tide. A television reporter who had been covering courthouse business hurried across the lawn with a cameraman close behind. 2 courthouse employees quietly searched Ethan's name on their phones. Rachel could not stop staring at the faded pickup truck parked beneath the maple trees. She suddenly remembered countless evenings when Ethan had come home exhausted from repairing engines, fixing fences, delivering supplies, and taking every honest job he could find. She had mistaken quiet sacrifice for lack of ambition. She had assumed invisible meant insignificant. Yet standing before her now was a man receiving the respect that could never be purchased, demanded, or fabricated. Judge Collins slowly approached the gathering, studying Ethan with an entirely different expression than the one she had worn inside her courtroom. Something told her that the story she believed she had finished hearing had only just begun. No one moved until Captain Mason Reed reached into the inside pocket of his flight jacket and carefully removed a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with a blue eagle insignia. He held it with both hands before extending it toward Ethan, not with casual familiarity but with unmistakable respect. "This was ordered to be delivered directly to you, sir," he said. Ethan accepted the envelope without ceremony, almost as though he had expected it someday, just not today. The paper felt heavier than its weight alone could explain. Lily looked up with quiet curiosity. "Is it another job, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan smiled gently. "Maybe it is." He broke the seal and unfolded a single letter. His eyes moved slowly across the page while the afternoon breeze flooded the edges. Whatever he read remained known only to him, yet something softened behind his calm expression. Mason waited patiently before speaking again. "The National Aviation Rescue Command has completed its review. Every recommendation was unanimous. They have requested that you return as Senior Strategic Advisor for the Mountain Search and Rescue Initiative. The position reports directly to the Commanding General." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Rachel stared at Ethan as though she had never truly seen him before. During their marriage she had known he once flew helicopters. She had known he served for many years. But she had never asked why retired officers still sent birthday cards every year or why veterans quietly thanked him whenever they crossed paths at small-town events. She had dismissed those moments as old friendships instead of recognizing the deep respect hidden inside them. Brandon Ellis cleared his throat, attempting to recover his confidence. I was under the impression Mr. Brooks had been unemployed for quite some time. Mason turned toward him with professional courtesy. Colonel Brooks retired from active service by choice. He declined multiple leadership appointments after requesting a family hardship transfer years ago. He believed raising his daughter was a greater responsibility than advancing his own career. Those words landed harder than any argument presented inside the courtroom. Judge Margaret Collins remained silent, absorbing every detail. She remembered Ethan refusing to criticize Rachel throughout the hearing. He never exaggerated. He never interrupted. He never appealed to sympathy. Instead, he answered every question with simple honesty. At the time, she had interpreted his restraint as resignation. Now she wondered if it had actually been strength. Lily tugged gently on Ethan's hand again. "Daddy, are we going somewhere?" Ethan looked down at her warm smile before answering. "Not today. Today belongs to you." Mason nodded with understanding. "The General anticipated that response, sir. Your transportation will remain available whenever you are ready." Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it back inside the envelope. "Please thank him for remembering me." Mason smiled for the first time. He said there was never anything to remember because no one ever forgot. The words hung quietly in the spring air. Ethan looked across the courthouse lawn toward his aging pickup truck sitting beneath the maple trees. Its faded paint, cracked dashboard, and high mileage suddenly seemed to tell a different story. He had never driven it because he lacked better options. He drove it because every extra dollar had gone toward Lily's school supplies, piano lessons, birthday cakes, winter coats, and the small dreams children should never have to sacrifice. Success had not disappeared from his life. It had simply worn work boots instead of polished shoes. Rachel lowered her eyes as memories rushed back with uncomfortable clarity. She remembered evenings when Ethan quietly repaired neighbors' fences without charging them. She remembered weekends when he volunteered to fly emergency medical supply missions after hurricanes, never speaking about them afterward. She remembered asking him more than once why he never accepted prestigious consulting offers. His answer had always been the same. "Money can wait. Childhood cannot." At the time, she believed those words reflected a lack of ambition. Standing there now, she finally understood they reflected a man whose priorities had never been for sale. Around the courthouse, people slowly put away their phones. Curiosity was giving way to admiration. The helicopter had not changed Ethan Brooks. It had simply revealed the quiet character that had been standing in plain sight all along. Judge Margaret Collins slowly descended the remaining courthouse steps until she stood only a few yards from Ethan. The authority she carried inside her courtroom had not disappeared, but it had been replaced by something quieter. It was the humility of a person beginning to realize that legal facts and human character did not always arrive together. She folded her hands respectfully before speaking. "Colonel Brooks," she said, "I hope you will forgive a personal question." Ethan turned toward her with the same calm expression that had remained unchanged throughout the day. "Of course, Your Honor." She hesitated for a brief moment. "Why did none of this come up during the hearing?" Ethan glanced down at the sealed envelope still resting in his hand before answering. "Because it had nothing to do with whether Lily deserves two parents who respect each other." The simplicity of his answer settled over the gathering like the gentle breeze moving through the courthouse flags. Nobody expected a speech about sacrifice or service. Nobody expected him to defend his reputation. Instead, he protected the dignity of everyone involved, including those who had underestimated him only minutes before. Rachel lowered her eyes again. Every memory that surfaced seemed sharper than the last. She remembered the day Ethan quietly declined an executive aviation contract that would have doubled their household income. She had argued with him for hours, insisting they needed a larger home, a newer vehicle, a different neighborhood. Ethan had listened patiently before saying, "If I spend 300 days a year away from Lily, I will buy her everything except the father she needs." At the time, she believed he was making another excuse for refusing success. Now those words echoed differently. Brandon Ellis shifted uncomfortably, searching for a logical explanation that would restore his confidence. If Mr. Brooks possessed credentials of this level, he said cautiously, why live so modestly? Mason Reed answered before Ethan could speak. Because he believed leadership begins with example. After his retirement, he quietly established scholarship funds for military children through anonymous donations. He volunteered for emergency aviation training in rural counties without accepting compensation. He requested that his name never appear in press releases. Brandon blinked. Anonymous? Mason nodded. He did not want gratitude. He wanted results. Ethan smiled almost apologetically. Captain, that is enough. Respectfully, sir, Mason replied. I was instructed not to leave until they understood who you really are. Ethan gave a small laugh, the first genuine laugh anyone had heard from him all day. Lily looked between the two men with growing amazement. Daddy, did you really fly helicopters in the mountains? Ethan nodded gently. For a long time. Were you scared? She asked. He considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But courage is not about never feeling afraid. It is about remembering someone else matters more than your fear. Lily slipped her small hand into his, holding it tightly as though she had just discovered a chapter of her father's life that had always been there waiting for her. Rachel watched that simple gesture and felt an ache far deeper than regret over a marriage that had ended. She realized she had spent years measuring Ethan by promotions, salaries, and titles while Lily had measured him by bedtime stories, homemade pancakes on Saturday mornings, and every promise he had quietly kept. Across the plaza, the television reporter lowered her microphone instead of rushing forward with another question. Somehow the story had become larger than headlines. This was no longer about a mysterious helicopter or an unexpected military connection. It was about the difference between public reputation and private character. Judge Collins finally spoke again. Colonel Brooks, I cannot change today's ruling simply because new information has appeared after the proceedings. The law requires careful process. Ethan nodded respectfully. I understand completely, Your Honor. She continued, but I can promise you this. If future matters involving your daughter come before this court, they will be viewed with a fuller understanding of the man standing before us today. Ethan inclined his head with quiet gratitude. That is more than enough. As the afternoon sunlight stretched longer across the courthouse lawn, the crowd slowly dispersed, yet no one seemed eager to leave. They had witnessed something rare. Not the arrival of power, but the unveiling of humility. The helicopter had drawn their attention, but it was Ethan's steady grace that remained in their hearts long after the blades settled into silence. The courthouse plaza gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm, yet an invisible line had been crossed that afternoon. People who had arrived expecting to witness the end of one man's story now found themselves quietly questioning the way they judged every stranger they passed. Ethan slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of his weathered jacket, and looked toward Lily with the same peaceful smile that had comforted her since she was old enough to remember. How about we keep our promise? He asked gently. Ice cream? Lily's face brightened immediately. Even after everything? Ethan nodded. Especially after everything. She wrapped both arms around his waist without another word. Some victories were loud enough to fill a stadium. Others sounded like a little girl believing her father would always keep his promises. Captain Mason Reed watched the moment with quiet admiration before speaking again. Sir, there is one more thing. Ethan turned. Mason reached into the helicopter and carefully removed a small wooden presentation case polished to a soft shine. He held it respectfully in both hands. The general asked that this be returned personally. He said it has waited long enough. Ethan slowly opened the case. Resting inside was a simple set of silver pilot wings beside a small challenge coin engraved with the words honor before self. There were no diamonds, no elaborate decorations, nothing that announced wealth or status. Yet Ethan's expression softened in a way Lily had never seen before. What is it? She asked quietly. He lifted the wings with remarkable care. These remind me of good people who trusted me when they needed someone to bring them home. Lily studied the polished metal. Did you save them? Ethan smiled gently. Many people saved each other. I was only one part of the team. Mason shook his head with a respectful grin. That is exactly why everyone wanted you to lead. Ethan closed the case again and looked toward the bright afternoon sky where scattered white clouds drifted above the courthouse dome. For several seconds he said nothing at all. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that follows gratitude too deep for quick words. Rachel remained nearby, uncertain whether she should leave or stay. She finally gathered enough courage to step closer. Ethan, she said softly. He turned without resentment. Yes? She searched for words that refused to come easily. I spent years believing success looked a certain way. Ethan listened without interruption. She continued, her voice quieter than before. I never realized you had already found something much more valuable. Ethan glanced at Lily before answering. We all see life through whatever matters most to us at the time. Sometimes it takes years before our eyes catch up with our hearts. Rachel lowered her head, not because he had embarrassed her, but because he had offered kindness where many people would have offered blame. Judge Collins observed the exchange from several steps away and recognized something rare. Real character did not appear after recognition arrived. It existed long before anyone noticed it. Recognition merely removed the curtain. Brandon Ellis slowly approached Ethan, extending his hand. Colonel Brooks, I owe you an apology. I believed I understood your story from financial records and employment history. Ethan accepted the handshake warmly. Most people did. Brandon looked puzzled. Does that not bother you? Ethan smiled. Not really. Every person you meet is carrying chapters you have never read. The attorney released his hand with thoughtful respect. Those words lingered longer than any legal argument he had presented all week. Lily looked toward the helicopter one more time. Daddy, will I get to fly with you someday? Ethan laughed softly. Only after you finish your homework and only after your grandmother says yes. Everyone nearby smiled, including Rachel. For the first time in many months, the tension surrounding their family eased into something gentler. The future remained uncertain. Court orders could still be reviewed. Conversations still needed to happen. Healing would take time. Yet beneath the warm afternoon sunlight, something far more important had already begun. Respect had quietly replaced assumption. Grace had quietly replaced pride. And the man who walked out believing he had lost almost everything discovered that the greatest inheritance he could leave his daughter had never been money, titles, or helicopters. It was the steady example of a life lived with humility, quiet strength, and unwavering character, because those are the treasures no courtroom can divide and no hardship can ever take away. The sun drifted lower above the courthouse as Captain Mason rechecked his watch, then looked back toward Ethan with quiet patience. Sir, he said, there is no pressure to decide today. The position will remain yours whether you answer this afternoon or next month. Ethan nodded gratefully. Please tell the General I appreciate that. Mason smiled. He already knew you would say exactly that. Lily looked from one man to the other with growing curiosity. Daddy, if they want you so much, why did you stop flying? Ethan gently squeezed her hand before answering. Because one day I realized there was someone more important than any mission waiting for me at home. Lily tilted her head. Me? Always you, Ethan replied. The little girl smiled so brightly that several people nearby could not help smiling with her. Judge Margaret Collins quietly walked back toward the courthouse entrance, but before disappearing inside she turned once more. Colonel Brooks. Ethan looked up. Yes, Your Honor? There is something I would like to say, not as a judge, but simply as another parent. Ethan waited respectfully. Your daughter is fortunate, she said. Many children grow up with successful parents. Far fewer grow up with parents who understand what success truly means. Ethan inclined his head modestly. Thank you. I hope she remembers kindness longer than achievement. Those words lingered in the afternoon air long after the judge disappeared behind the courthouse doors. Rachel remained standing only a few feet away, watching Ethan and Lily laugh together over something only the two of them understood. The scene felt strangely familiar. She remembered countless mornings when Ethan woke before sunrise to cook breakfast shaped like little animals because Lily had once laughed at a pancake shaped like a bear. She remembered school concerts where he arrived in dusty work clothes because he had come straight from repairing engines without stopping to change. She remembered birthdays where he spent hours decorating their small living room by hand because paying someone else to do it would have meant buying one less present for Lily. None of those moments had seemed extraordinary then. Looking back, they suddenly felt priceless. Rachel slowly stepped closer. "Ethan," she said quietly, "would you mind if Lily and I walked to the ice cream shop together?" Ethan looked toward Lily first instead of answering himself. "What do you think, Peanut?" Lily looked at both of her parents before nodding. "I would like that." Ethan smiled warmly. "Then that sounds like a good plan." Rachel blinked in surprise. "You are not angry?" he answered without hesitation. Being angry would not make Lily's childhood any happier. Rachel lowered her eyes again. Every response he gave carried the same quiet grace that had once drawn her to him before ambition and disappointment had clouded her judgment. Captain Reed watched the exchange with admiration. "Sir," he said softly, "the stories were true." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Which stories?" Mason laughed. "That you could calm a room without raising your voice." Ethan smiled. "That only works when people are ready to listen." A gentle breeze swept across the courthouse plaza, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the nearby city park. The helicopter remained waiting in complete stillness, no longer the center of attention. Ironically, the remarkable aircraft had become little more than scenery beside the greater example unfolding between a father and his daughter. Several reporters quietly packed away their equipment without requesting interviews. Somehow microphones no longer seemed necessary. The real story had already been told through actions that required no headlines. As Ethan, Rachel, and Lily began walking slowly toward the sidewalk leading to the neighborhood ice cream shop, Mason remained behind beside the aircraft. He watched the small family disappear beneath a row of flowering maple trees before reaching into his pocket and removing his phone. When the call connected, he smiled. "General," he said, "you were right. He has not changed at all." A warm voice answered through the speaker. "Good. Men who chase recognition become different people. Men who chase character usually stay the same." Mason glanced toward Ethan one last time. The colonel was laughing softly because Lily had insisted on holding one hand while Rachel held the other. It looked wonderfully ordinary. Yet Mason understood he was witnessing something extraordinary. The strongest leaders were not always standing at podiums or commanding large organizations. Sometimes they were simply walking down a quiet sidewalk, choosing forgiveness over pride, family over applause, and love over every title the world could possibly offer. The little bell above the neighborhood ice cream shop chimed softly as Ethan held the door open for Lily and Rachel. The familiar smell of fresh waffle cones, vanilla, and warm caramel wrapped around them like an old memory that had never truly disappeared. It was the same small family-owned shop Ethan had visited with Lily almost every Friday evening, even during the months when every dollar had to be counted twice. Mrs. Harper, the elderly owner, smiled the moment she saw them. "Well, look who finally made it," she said warmly. "Chocolate with rainbow sprinkles for my favorite young lady?" Lily laughed. "You remembered." Mrs. Harper winked. "Some things are too important to forget." Rachel quietly watched the exchange, realizing this was another part of Ethan's life she had never fully noticed. He was not simply known here. He belonged here. People greeted him with genuine affection rather than admiration for wealth or status. Ethan ordered a simple black coffee instead of ice cream. Rachel frowned gently. "You are not having any?" He smiled. "Watching her enjoy it has always been enough." Mrs. Harper interrupted before Rachel could respond. "That is not entirely true." She disappeared behind the counter and returned with a small bowl of Ethan's favorite butter pecan. "You paid for 3 meals last winter when the Johnson family could not afford dinner. You never knew I found out. Today this one is on the house. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. Mrs. Harper, you really did not have to. She folded her arms with a playful smile. And you really did not have to help them either. Please sit down. Rachel slowly lowered herself into the booth across from Ethan, saying nothing for several moments. Outside the front window, afternoon sunlight painted long golden lines across the sidewalk while children laughed in the nearby park. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary, yet the ordinary suddenly seemed far more meaningful than luxury ever had. Can I ask you something? Rachel finally said. Ethan nodded. Of course. Were you ever disappointed with your life? Ethan stirred his coffee thoughtfully before answering. Sometimes I was tired. Sometimes I worried about bills. Sometimes I wondered if I was giving Lily enough. But disappointed? No. Rachel looked confused. How? Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was carefully arranging colorful sprinkles into the shape of a smile. Because every morning I woke up knowing exactly who I wanted to become. I did not always reach every goal, but I never lost my direction. Rachel quietly absorbed his words. She remembered spending years chasing larger homes, nicer neighborhoods, and more prestigious social circles. Somewhere along the way she had mistaken comfort for fulfillment. Ethan had quietly built something far stronger without ever announcing it. Just then the shop door opened again. Captain Mason Reed stepped inside, removing his flight cap respectfully. Sorry to interrupt, sir, he said. The general asked me to deliver one final message in person. Ethan smiled. You have already done more than enough today. Mason shook his head. He insisted. He handed Ethan a small folded note written in neat blue ink. Ethan opened it and read silently. A faint smile crossed his face before he passed the note to Lily. She slowly sounded out the words aloud. The nation can replace helicopters. It can replace commanders. It cannot replace fathers who choose character over glory. Welcome home whenever you are ready. Lily looked up with shining eyes. Daddy, they miss you. Ethan gently folded the note again. Maybe. But they also understood why I left. Mason nodded. Every officer who served under you understood. Some even became better parents because of your example. Rachel felt tears gathering, not from sadness but from a quiet recognition that arrived too late to change the past, and just early enough to change the future. She looked at Ethan across the table and saw not the man she once believed had settled for less, but someone who had deliberately chosen what mattered most. The conversation drifted into comfortable silence while Lily happily finished the last spoonful of her ice cream. Outside, the helicopter still waited in the distance beyond the trees, yet for the first time all afternoon it no longer represented the greatest surprise of the day. The greatest surprise was discovering that true greatness had never arrived with the aircraft at all. It had been quietly sitting in this little ice cream shop for years, drinking black coffee, keeping promises, remembering birthdays, helping neighbors without expecting applause, and showing one little girl every single day that the strongest people are often the gentlest ones. The afternoon slowly melted into early evening as Ethan, Rachel, and Lily stepped out of the little ice cream shop together. The golden light stretched across the sidewalks, painting the quiet town with the kind of warmth that made ordinary moments feel unforgettable. Children rode bicycles through the neighborhood, sprinklers clicked steadily across freshly cut lawns, and somewhere in the distance a church bell marked the passing hour. Lily skipped ahead a few steps before turning back with an excited smile. Can we walk through the park before we go home? Ethan nodded without hesitation. I think that is the best idea I have heard all day. Rachel smiled softly, surprised by how natural everything suddenly felt. They crossed the street together and entered the familiar park where Lily had learned to ride her bicycle years earlier. Ethan remembered every scraped knee, every tiny victory, every laugh that had echoed beneath the old oak trees. Those memories had never required expensive vacations or grand celebrations. They had only required time, patience, and presence. Lily ran toward the wooden bridge overlooking a small pond where ducks drifted peacefully through the still water. Daddy, look! She called. The baby ducks are bigger now. Ethan walked beside her, smiling as though he had all the time in the world. They grow faster than we realize. Rachel quietly followed several steps behind, watching the father and daughter together. For years she had convinced herself that financial security alone could build a happy future. Now she understood something she had overlooked. Security without love could still feel empty, but love given faithfully every single day created a foundation no amount of money could replace. She finally caught up with Ethan near the bridge railing. "There is something I need to tell you," she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her with patient attention. "You do not have to say anything if it is difficult." Rachel shook her head. "No. I do." She looked toward the calm water before continuing. "I spent so much energy trying to build the perfect life that I forgot to appreciate the person helping me build it. I kept waiting for you to become someone else instead of recognizing the man you already were." Ethan rested both hands on the smooth wooden railing. "We both made mistakes." Rachel looked at him with surprise. "You still share the responsibility?" Ethan gave a gentle smile. "Marriage is rarely one story told by one person. We both carried hopes. We both carried disappointments. The important thing now is Lily." Rachel felt tears gathering once again. There was no accusation in his voice, no hidden bitterness waiting to escape. Forgiveness had already reached his heart long before this conversation ever happened. Just then Lily came running back, holding a tiny white feather she had found beside the pond. "Daddy, can we keep it?" Ethan examined the feather carefully before placing it back into her small hand. "You can keep it if you promise to remember where it came from." Lily nodded eagerly. "Why?" Ethan smiled. "Because beautiful things should remind us to be thankful, not possessive." Rachel quietly memorized those words. She realized Ethan had been teaching lessons through simple conversations for years. Character was never forced upon Lily. It was woven gently into ordinary afternoons, shared walks, and quiet moments exactly like this one. As they continued along the winding path, they noticed Captain Mason Reed standing near the park entrance beside the waiting vehicle that had brought him from the courthouse. He removed his cap respectfully as they approached. "I apologize for interrupting one final time," he said. Ethan laughed softly. "Captain, at this point I think you have earned the right." Mason smiled before handing Ethan a small photograph protected inside a clear sleeve. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside a rescue helicopter surrounded by smiling crew members beneath a bright mountain sky. Across the bottom someone had written in blue ink, "The safest flight was always the one you commanded because every life mattered equally to you." Ethan looked quietly at the photograph for several moments before closing his eyes with gratitude. Lily gently touched the picture. "Daddy, they all loved you." Ethan looked at his daughter and answered with the same humility that had guided every step of his life. "If they did, it was because we trusted each other. No one accomplishes anything meaningful alone." The evening breeze stirred gently through the trees as the family continued walking together, leaving behind not only the courthouse and the misunderstandings of the past, but also the need to prove anything to anyone. At last, the only opinion that truly mattered was walking beside Ethan, holding his hand with complete confidence, believing with all her heart that the greatest man she had ever known was simply her father. Several weeks passed, and life settled into a quieter rhythm than anyone could have imagined. The courthouse had faded into memory, the helicopter had returned to its base, and the headlines that briefly captured the town's attention disappeared as news stories replaced old ones. Yet inside the Brooks family, something far more lasting had begun to grow. Every Saturday morning, Ethan and Lily still visited the neighborhood farmers' market before sharing breakfast at the same little diner they had loved for years. They still stopped to wave at Mrs. Harper whenever they passed her ice cream shop. They still drove the old pickup truck that rattled over every familiar street, because Ethan believed gratitude was never measured by what someone drove but by how they treated the people they met along the way. One bright autumn afternoon, Lily came home from school carrying a folded piece of construction paper decorated with colorful crayons. "Daddy," she said excitedly, "we had to write about our hero." Ethan smiled as he said, aside the engine part he had been repairing in the garage. That sounds like a fun assignment. Lily handed him the paper. Will you read mine? Ethan carefully unfolded the page. Across the top, written in large uneven letters, were the words, "My hero is my dad." Below them Lily had written, "My dad helps people even when nobody is watching. He keeps promises. He is kind when other people are not kind back. He says real strength is being gentle. He always comes home." Ethan paused, unable to speak for several moments. His eyes grew moist as he quietly folded the paper again. "This is the best award I have ever received," he whispered. Lily wrapped her arms around him. "I knew you would like it." At that very moment, another familiar vehicle pulled into the driveway. Rachel stepped out carrying a small apple pie. She smiled nervously before walking toward the porch. "I hope I am not interrupting." Ethan welcomed her with the same warmth he had shown since the day outside the courthouse. "You are always welcome." Rachel placed the pie on the kitchen counter before looking around the modest home she had once believed was not enough. She noticed framed photographs of camping trips, homemade birthday decorations, school art projects covering the refrigerator, and a carefully polished pair of silver pilot wings resting quietly on a bookshelf instead of displayed as trophies. Everything inside the house reflected the same truth. Love had always lived here. She turned toward Ethan. "The court approved the updated parenting agreement this morning." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. "They did?" Rachel nodded. "Judge Collins said Lily deserves as much time as possible with the father who has always placed her first." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment of gratitude before smiling. "Thank you?" Rachel gently shook her head. "No. Thank you? You showed me that winning an argument is never as important as protecting a child." Lily laughed happily and took both of their hands. "Does that mean we can all go to the school concert together next month?" Rachel looked toward Ethan. He smiled. "I would like that very much." Outside, the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves across the neighborhood, while children played basketball in nearby driveways and families gathered on front porches before sunset. Nothing about the scene looked extraordinary. There were no cameras, no uniforms, no speeches, and no applause. Yet perhaps that was the greatest ending of all. Ethan had never needed the helicopter to prove his worth. He had never needed titles to define his character or recognition to validate his sacrifices. The world had finally discovered what one little girl had always known. A person's greatest legacy is not built by the moments everyone sees, but by the quiet choices made when nobody is looking. Respect earned through humility lasts longer than admiration earned through success. Grace offered without conditions heals wounds pride never can. And sometimes the richest inheritance a father leaves his child is not a fortune waiting in a bank account, but the steady example of a life filled with dignity, compassion, forgiveness, and unwavering love, because those gifts continue guiding a heart long after every courtroom grows silent and every helicopter disappears beyond the horizon.